To Sketch, we're going to walk through a pretty simple sign up form. I think we'll only go through this main part here, the form with two text fields and a button. And I'll show you how to add, how to create these individual elements. This is comprised of symbols that you have overrides that you can do, and I'll get into all that soon. We've also got the system keyboard, the status bar at the top, and the back button that's kind of the default for iOS. So let's start making this with a new document with Command N. Now we've got a blank sketch document. We'll do A for artboard, choose iPhone XS. This creates the iPhone XS size screen. Now on this artboard, we're going to create our background for our document with a rectangle with R. I'm going to drag that across the whole doc, or the whole artboard, I mean. By default, it's gray. I'm going to remove the border, delete it, and instead of a color fill, we'll do an image. We could choose one from the computer, but I can actually use Sketch's new data function up here to insert a random unsplash photo. I'm going to do that, see how this one looks. It's not bad. I'm not a huge fan of the colors up here, so we can actually refresh this with Command-Shift-D to refresh the data. This one will work. Let's first start with our main title at the top. That should be pretty simple. So we have a rectangle for the background. Now we're going to do T for text. We're going to do it in the center. This uses the most recently used text style. So we're using San Francisco Pro Text. Let's do, this is for the title, let's do 34 point. And from regular, we'll go to bold. And instead of text, we're going to choose SF Pro Display. That'll pull in the tracking and use the display version of Apple's default font. We're going to move this to the center, and we can see that with the red line. We're going to also make sure the alignment is now center. I'm going to edit this, and we're going to call this sign up. The next thing we'll do is add the back button, kind of moving our way down the page. This is done using Apple's design library. So if we do plus for insert, I've already installed this, and Sketch has a version of this built in automatically, or that you can download right in your Sketch settings, I think. But I downloaded Apple's that is like directly from the company, so to make sure that it is all as the most up to date as can be. So we have Apple iOS UI and iOS UI design. This is from Sketch, and this is from Apple directly. But I'm going to pull the back button down. It's actually under bars, navigation bar, and then this X, which is kind of for the elements that are related to that, and left combinations. The first one up here is actually over a dark background and the back button. We can insert that one. That'll work. And then we're going to just leave it there. So this says parent title. We actually are able to override that. And one of the tricks that I often use for overriding if I don't actually want any text is I'll just do a space. That'll remove the text. And actually I don't mind the orange that is kind of Apple's color for the dark background. Maybe we'll keep that for now. But I can decrease the size of this. Now this is going to be the tappable area. This is already set up for a prototype, which I won't get into at the moment. But you might have seen that when I decreased the size, it didn't actually move the chevron there. If I go all the way over, it'll reverse it. There's a lot of settings that you can do in Sketch in order to make it so that things don't, like some things resize and some things don't resize. This is really useful when you're doing responsive designs and doing a variety of screen sizes, but we don't have to get into that too much into that today. Let's create our first text field with a rectangle for the background. I'm going to pull out from the center by holding Option, and we're going to do the text field as a rectangle that's 335 by 50. Now it only has 34, so let's move it up to 35, and let's do the X position as 20, so that's in the center. We could also center it with this button at the top. I'm going to round the corners to about 4, delete the border, and for the text field we're going to make this white, and I'm going to have the alpha, that's the opacity of the fill, at 90. Let's add a shadow as well. We'll do 5 pixels down, a 10 pixel blur. That's usually one of the things that I like to start with. And we'll do much lighter opacity for the shadow at maybe 15. One of the things that Sketch has built in that's used a lot in iOS is a background blur. So in order to make text readable on kind of a decreased opacity background, we can check blur. Default is Gaussian blur, but we can choose background blur. 10 strength is fine. Now it kind of pulls the color in from the background, but it's going to be completely clear for your text, which we'll add now with T. Again, using the same font style that I had last time. So let's left align this one. Put it about where we want it. But for this one, we're going to do SF text, and this one 18 point. Oops, I just collapsed the text section in the inspector accidentally, and we'll choose regular. We'll center it or so. One of the cool things that's built into Sketch as well is using the Option key to see something's distance from other elements. So we can actually see that this is currently 13 from the top, 11 from the left, and 16 from the bottom. I can use my arrow keys to move it to exactly where I want it. That looks pretty good, 15 on the top and left. Let's create the cursor now with another rectangle. R for rectangle. I'll center it on the text. I'll pull it out from the center, and I happen to know that the default cursor in iOS is 2 by 21, so we'll move it down to 21. The corners are fully rounded. We're going to delete the border again, but the fill we're going to do as a blue, as the cursor generally is on iOS. We're going to move the cursor right up next to the text, and in a minute you'll see something cool that actually is able to happen because of doing that. Let's rename this layer that's the rectangle for the cursor. We'll do Command R to rename that cursor. And for the rectangle that's the background, we'll do maybe text field VG. Now let's make the label with T, and we'll do this one as label. But we'll move the font size down to 14. Let's have it just give it a little more space on top of the text field. Now all our basic elements for the active text field are here. So I'm going to select all of these. And just for clarity's sake, let's reorganize these a bit and move label on top of type something, cursor maybe below that, just so that I can kind of organize, and you'll see in a second another benefit from that too. If I select all these layers and I create symbol, we're going to call the whole symbol text field, but we're going to make text field as a group that contains, so we'll do a slash, and then we'll do the focus state of the text field. We'll send it to the symbols page. Now all of those layers have been collapsed into text field focus. In order to make the disabled version of the text field, let's double click on the symbol, and this brings us over to the symbols page. This is kind of the parent now that determines everything that happens to the instances of the symbol. So if I were to change the type size here, or move one of these elements, or change one of their styles, it'll be changed on every single instance of this symbol. So that I can see the background, because it's a white text box more easily, I'm going to add a background color to the artboard by selecting the artboard, choosing background color, and we'll do just kind of a gray so we can see everything. But we're not going to include it in export or include it in the instances. This will make sure that the background color is only for editing sake on the symbol. Let's duplicate this symbol with Command D. And now we've got two different text fields as symbols, but this one we're going to rename with Command R and call this one the default view, or state rather. And then we don't need the cursor anymore, so we'll delete that. And then for the background, we'll move the fill opacity down to 50%. So this is something that the user doesn't have selected. Let's go back to page 1. We've still got this original text field focus that we just created from the document. Now we're going to insert a new symbol, which is now under this folder of text field and default. So now we've got the active state and the default state. And now you also have the ability to do these overrides, which are one of the things that make symbols really, really powerful. So I can actually change the label This is why we reorganized the order of the layers there, because now label is on top. It would be a bit confusing if label was below type something, and that just has to do with the order of the layers for the symbol. So for the label for this first one, I'm going to do name, and for the label for the second one, I'm going to do city. Now I can either type these manually, like we did with the back button up there. One of the tricks that I do sometimes is a space to just make it have nothing. So we'll just do a space there too. And we'll come back to these in a second, but let's just complete the page with the button. So we'll do a very similar thing. We could go through the process of making a symbol for these as well, but just for time's sake, I'm going to do the button just as is. We'll do that 200 maybe by 60. Delete the border. Let's make this like a nice, we can pull maybe from one of those colors. And then we'll make the corners a little more rounded even than the text box. T for button style, or for text, and we'll do button label. Center this. Make sure the type is centered, and then we'll do 18 points. Oops. Bold. It's kind of weird. I'm not sure what's centered, so I'm going to select both of these and center them, and then make sure that it's centered on the page. I think that's okay. It's centering it on that element, which I do know is centered on the page. Button label, let's actually do it as like a white. We can also add insert from the Apple iOS UI kit the status bar for iPhone on light. I can put that at the very top, and I can insert from Apple system the keyboard. Do light alphabetic. Put this at the very bottom, and we'll make sure that it has some space for the button. These, how about I group it with Command G so that I can move them around together, and I can keep that there. This looks pretty good for now. Check this out. I can type something like I mentioned, or you can automatically fill text fields now in Sketch with either names or world cities. Like we did with the image from Unsplash, we can now insert a world city name or a person name, and it automatically has data that's really useful for us in the design process. One of the other things you might notice is that the cursor always is going to follow the end of the text. Now this is just because of the default settings for the way that elements interact, but this is a really useful thing to know if you're creating relative objects. It's not perfect, and there's a lot you can do with these resizing options up here, but this is one quite useful thing for us. Now, because we have these two elements, and because they're both under the same folder, the default text view and the focused text view, we can change their state really easily. So I can actually go in here and choose where it says focus. I can change the state to default now. And we can say that this one's in focus. So that was a quick overview of how to create some basic symbols in Sketch, how to create this kind of simple sign-up form. I might be able to make a video for doing a prototype as well. We didn't really get to that here, but each of these elements you can make clickable. You can add hotspots and links to go to different screens, like I did in the original version of this. But I think this kind of gives at least a general direction for how to use Sketch and how to use some of these basic tools and symbols. So hopefully this was useful for you guys, and I'll talk to you again soon.